History rarely announces its most important turning points. They arrive disguised as routine policy decisions, until the consequences begin reshaping the global order. The financial shock unleashed in February 2022 was one of those moments. Only 2 days after Russian forces crossed the Ukrainian border, the United States and European Union reached for what they believed was their sharpest tool: ejecting Russia from the SWIFT network, the communications backbone of global banking. On paper, the move seemed catastrophic for Moscow. SWIFT connects more than 11,000 banks across 200 jurisdictions and routes trillions of dollars in transactions every day. To be cut off is to lose the ability to send or receive payments across borders. No trade settlement, no access to global finance, total isolation. Western governments expected the ruble to crumble, Russia's markets to collapse, and its economy to buckle under the weight of exclusion. Some predicted Vladimir Putin would be forced either to retreat or face fury at home. But the collapse never came. Russia absorbed the shock, stabilized the currency, and rerouted its trade through new channels. Within months, the consequences of the SWIFT strike ricocheted outward. Dozens of countries, friends, rivals, and neutrals alike, realized that the global financial system could be used as a political weapon. If it could happen to Russia, it could happen to them. And that realization triggered a global shift that no one in Washington fully anticipated. To understand why this matters, we need to look at the recurring historical pattern. Whenever a dominant power controls the international financial infrastructure, it eventually uses that leverage to punish adversaries. Each time, the immediate target suffers, but the rest of the world learns the same lesson: diversify, build alternatives, reduce exposure. The weapon that once ensured dominance becomes the very thing that accelerates its erosion. This cycle is unfolding once again, and it begins with Stage 1. Stage 1, the dominant power controls the payment system for nearly half a century. The United States has wielded unmatched influence over global finance, not because it owns SWIFT, but because the dollar dominates world trade. SWIFT is headquartered in Belgium, but the vast majority of international transactions ultimately settle in dollars through correspondent banks in New York. That gives Washington leverage no other power possesses. If the U.S. Treasury sanctions a financial institution, SWIFT almost always complies. If the Federal Reserve restricts dollar clearing, a bank becomes effectively invisible in global commerce. From 1973, when SWIFT was created, through 2022, this structure formed the foundation of American financial supremacy. It wasn't a formal empire. It was something subtler, an infrastructure advantage so deeply embedded in global trade that most countries accepted it as the natural order. But the moment a dominant power begins using that system as a weapon, the ground beneath it starts to shift. Stage 2, financial infrastructure becomes a tool of foreign policy. After the September 11th attacks, the United States expanded its use of financial sanctions. Initially, the targets were terrorist groups and money laundering networks. Over time, the scope widened: Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, Syria, and eventually Russia. Every new sanction reinforced a precedent. Global finance could be shaped by U.S. policy choices. By the time Russia invaded Ukraine, using the SWIFT nuclear option no longer seemed extreme. It appeared inevitable. The infrastructure existed, the political will was there, and the U.S. was confident that exerting pressure would force compliance. So Washington froze roughly $300 billion of Russia's central bank reserves and supported SWIFT's expulsion of major Russian financial institutions. The message to the world was unmistakable. Membership in the dollar-centric system was not guaranteed. It could be revoked. Stage 3, the target builds alternatives. Russia's response did not follow the script the West had written. Rather than crumble, Moscow pivoted. Years earlier, after the 2014 Crimea sanctions, Russia had begun reducing its dependence on the dollar. That preparation now became crucial. Russia expanded SPFS, its domestic alternative to SWIFT. It shifted large volumes of trade to China's CIPS payment network. It relied on barter, direct currency swaps, and commodity-linked transactions. Energy sales flowed to China, India, and the Middle East. By 2024, an estimated 40% of Russia's international trade was conducted without the dollar, and most of its commerce with China was settled in yuan and rubles. The lesson for the rest of the world was clear. A country can survive being cut off from SWIFT if it has time, motivation, and enough trading partners. What was meant to economically incapacitate Russia instead revealed the limits of America's leverage. Stage 4, neutral countries begin hedging their bets. This is where the real transformation began, not with Russia, but with the countries watching from the sidelines. If reserves could be frozen by executive order, were they truly sovereign? If SWIFT access could be removed over political disagreements, was reliance on the system safe? For many nations the answer was suddenly no. China accelerated its de-dollarization strategy. It cut its U.S. Treasury holdings dramatically, expanded its gold reserves, and pushed harder for CIPS adoption. Saudi Arabia, after 5 decades of dollar-exclusive oil pricing, began accepting yuan for crude sales to China. The UAE and India experimented with rupee, dirham settlements. Brazil, Argentina, and other emerging economies pursued regional currency arrangements. Even the European Union explored Instex, its own mechanism for trade outside the reach of U.S. sanctions. More than 50 central banks began piloting or researching payment systems that reduced dependency on the dollar and on SWIFT. Not out of hostility toward the United States, but out of self-preservation. Because after 2022, every finance minister understood a new truth. Your reserves are secure only as long as your relationship with Washington remains secure. Stage 5, the original weapon loses its power, and this brings us to the final stage of the pattern, the moment when the weapon that once seemed unstoppable begins to dull. That is where the world stands today. SWIFT remains dominant, yes, but its dominance has started to erode around the edges. You can see it clearly in the numbers. The dollar's share of global reserves has slipped from about 71% in 1999 to roughly 58% in 2024. A 13-point drop may not sound dramatic, but in the world of international reserves, that represents trillions of dollars moving away from U.S. assets. Even more striking is what's happening in global trade settlement. In 2022, nearly 3/4 of cross-border payments were still denominated in dollars. By 2024, that figure had fallen toward 58%, a steep 15-point collapse in just 2 years. It is the fastest pace of de-dollarization ever recorded. SWIFT's total message volume keeps rising, but its share of global financial messaging is shrinking. China's CIPS processed 136 million messages in 2023, up from 91 million in 2022, a staggering 50% year-over-year surge. Russia's SPFS runs about 2 million domestic messages per day. And India's UPI, once a purely national payments network, handled a mind-bending 12 billion transactions in 2024, with cross-border functions expanding. The world is not waiting for alternatives, it is already building them. This is the essence of Stage 5. A financial weapon may work brilliantly the first time, but once deployed, its power never fully returns. After the SWIFT cutoff, Russia absorbed the initial blow, stabilized, adapted, and most importantly showed the world that such a strike is survivable. The element of surprise is gone. The next target will not walk into the trap unprepared. And neutral states, once complacent, now understand that relying on a system controlled by Washington is an unacceptable long-term risk. This is the same pattern that dethroned Britain a century ago. From 1914 to 1944, London's financial grip weakened step by step until the dollar replaced the pound at Bretton Woods. The United States is now walking its own version of that timeline, 2022 to roughly 2042, only in a faster, more technologically accelerated environment. The data makes the trend impossible to dismiss. Before sanctions in 2021, roughly 87% of Russia's trade was settled in dollars or euros. By 2024, that figure had dropped to about 60%. The remaining 40% now moves through yuan, rubles, rupees, dirhams, and other currencies. Russia and China conduct $240 billion in annual trade, almost entirely outside the dollar system. Russia-India trade sits near $65 billion, again largely settled in rupees. Russia has effectively become the world's proof of concept. A major economy demonstrating that life outside the dollar SWIFT system is not only possible, but increasingly practical. China's CIPS system has grown even more aggressively. In 2020, CIPS cleared around $12 trillion in payments. By 2023, that number had exploded to $27 trillion, more than double in just 3 years. The network now connects over 1,400 institutions across 110 countries, quietly forming a real competitor to the dollar-centric clearing architecture. Central banks are responding exactly as they did in every previous cycle of declining trust, with gold. In 2022, they purchased 1,136 tons. 2023, another 1,037 tons. 2024, more than 1,000 tons yet again. 3 consecutive years of 4-digit gold buying, the highest sustained accumulation since the 1970s, just before the old Bretton Woods system collapsed. And who's doing the buying? China, Russia, Turkey, India, Singapore, Poland, the Czech Republic. They're converting reserve assets from something the US can freeze into something no government can sanction. Even trade financing is breaking free of the dollar. China now has more than 40 active currency swap agreements worth roughly $500 billion, enabling settlement in local currencies. Russia has swaps with China, India, Iran. India with the UAE and Japan. Brazil and Argentina are exploring regional settlement. ASEAN countries openly discuss ditching the dollar for intra-regional trade. These aren't rumors, they're operational systems. The petrodollar, the cornerstone of dollar supremacy for 50 years, is also losing its exclusivity. Saudi Arabia now accepts yuan for oil sold to China. Russia takes rupees from India. The UAE settles in dirhams and yuan. Iran and Iraq negotiate similar arrangements. The monopoly is broken, and once a monopoly breaks, it rarely returns. BRICS is expanding as well. From 5 members, it grew to 9, representing almost half of humanity, over a third of global GDP, and close to half of world oil production. At the 2023 Johannesburg Summit, BRICS leaders announced plans for a commodity-linked currency, backed by gold, oil, metals, and other strategic resources. It's not yet implemented, but the intention is unmistakable: build an escape hatch from the dollar system. Put all of this together, and the conclusion is unavoidable. De-dollarization isn't a theoretical future, it's underway, measurable, and accelerating. Every month, more reserves shift out of dollars. Every quarter, CIPS grows. Every year, a greater share of global trade settles in non-dollar currencies. The financial weapon used in 2022 didn't strengthen the system, it shattered the illusion of its permanence. So what does the timeline look like? If we mirror Britain's decline, a 30-year arc from deploying financial coercion in 1914 to losing reserve currency status in 1944, then America's window runs roughly from 2022 to the early 2040s. And technology makes transitions happen faster today. What once required decades of building telegraph lines and correspondent bank networks now happens with cloud infrastructure and digital rails. CIPS more than doubled its volume in just 3 years. Alternative systems scale at software speed, not 20th century speed. My estimate, based on historical pattern, current velocity, and technological acceleration, is a 15 to 25-year horizon from the moment of weaponization. That places the dollar's slide from dominance somewhere between 2037 and 2047. Not a collapse, not a disappearance, but a transition to a multipolar reserve system. The dollar at 35–40%, the euro around 20–25%, the yuan rising steadily, and gold cementing itself as the ultimate hedge. And the implications for the U.S. are enormous. Dollar dominance allows America to run massive deficits at low cost because global demand for treasuries stays high. It allows the U.S. to import far more than it exports, paying with currency the world is eager to hold. It allows inflation to be exported abroad. Once the dollar share of reserves falls below 40%, that privilege evaporates. Treasury demand falls. Interest rates rise. Deficits become impossible to finance. The American cost of living, subsidized for decades by the world's appetite for dollars, converges toward global norms. For China, this shift is a strategic windfall. It doesn't need to beat the US militarily. It simply needs to provide functional alternatives as the dollar weakens. CIPS grows, the yuan gains legitimacy, gold reserves increase, and financial technologies from Chinese companies become global infrastructure. Russia also benefits not because it becomes richer, but because it proved the old system can be bypassed. BRICS nations gain bargaining power. Gold gains credibility. And every alternative payment system, from CIPS to UPI to crypto rails, gains market share. The losers are equally clear. The United States loses the extraordinary privileges of reserve currency hegemony. Europe loses influence alongside Washington. SWIFT becomes just one network among many. Holders of dollar-denominated assets face persistent erosion in real value. American households experience higher prices as imports become more expensive. The free lunch the US enjoyed for decades begins to disappear. And that brings the story full circle. Financial weapons, once used, do not remain weapons, they become warnings. The SWIFT cutoff in 2022 looked like a show of overwhelming force. In reality, it accelerated the construction of an entirely new financial architecture. The US didn't lose dominance because another empire rose up to defeat it. It lost dominance because it incentivized the world to build alternatives. The 5-stage cycle is complete. The dominant power controlled the system. It weaponized the system. The target adapted. Neutral countries hedged. And now the weapon is losing its power. The era of uncontested dollar supremacy is ending, not with collapse but with competition. Not through an enemy's victory but through America's own choices.